Oh my goodness, you are such an inspiration. Wow, you really are. You're so strong. Can I pet your service dog? Ugh. 1, 2, 3, let's go! We are artists, parents, teachers, good guys, bad guys, students, leaders. I'm not your inspiration, yeah, I'm fully who I am. Got my own expectations that don't fit into your plans. I'm not your sad story, so I wrote it in this song. Everything you know about disability is wrong. Yeah, everything you know. Yeah, everything you know about disability is wrong.
Hey, listeners. You'll hear us get to say hey, listeners twice in this episode because before we get into this episode, we just wanted to pop on and let you know that as a content warning, in this episode, we will be discussing eating disorders and just the lack of control that can lead to them. And we understand that that content is not always what someone is looking for that day. So we just wanted to let you know that that is in this episode. And be safe, take care of yourself, do what you need to do.
Hey listeners, welcome to another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong. Today on the podcast, we have Amanda McGrory.
Amanda is a 4-time Paralympian in 2008 Beijing, 2012 London, 2016 Rio, and 2020 Tokyo, and a 7-time Paralympic medalist, as well as a past winner of the Chicago, New York, London, and Tokyo marathons. McGrory attended the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign from 2004 to 2010 on an athletic scholarship before pursuing a full-time career as a professional wheelchair marathoner.
She received her MSLIS in 2018 from UIUC and was hired by the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee as the archivist and collections curator in July of 2020. Welcome to the podcast, Amanda.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today.
We're so excited to have you. Before we dive into questions, which we have a lot of, let's do our audio descriptions. This is just where we describe what we look like on camera for our blind or low vision audience. So, Erin, you want to start?
Sure. This is Erin. I have red hair. I'm a white woman. I'm wearing a pink shirt, and I'm in my bedroom.
This is Lily speaking. I am a mixed race white presenting woman with green eyes and brown hair. I'm wearing my usual all black turtleneck outfit, but I have a new necklace. Longtime listeners will know that I broke my other necklace that I fidgeted with a lot during the episodes. My sister got me a new one. It's a face with little flowers in it. Shout out to my sister. And I am sitting in my office, and there's a bunch of great books on disability justice in general behind me. Amanda, you want to give your audio description?
Yeah, this is Amanda. I am a white woman with medium length brown hair and gray eyes. I'm wearing a gray shirt, and I am inside my office at the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee.
And Amanda has on a phenomenal lipstick color, by the way. It's so good.
Going with the bright red lip today.
I love a bright red lip.
We were talking before we started recording that I've been having terrible allergies, and I have a allergy rash on my neck. So I'm trying to distract from that with the bright red lips.
Oh, it's working. I love when someone can rock a bright red lip. All right, we're ready to dive in. This is an exciting interview for us, Amanda, because like athletics are very out of our realm. And so like it's just a whole new world. We have a lot of questions for you, and feel free to like correct us on any language we use because this is new. Let's dive in, Erin. You ready to ask our name shake question?
Yes, I am. So our show is called Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong. So we like to ask every guest, what do people get wrong about you and your disability?
Oh, we're going right in with the hard ones.
Yeah.
So I think this is something we talk a lot about in my work here at the Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And it's when we're talking about athletes with disabilities. and what it means to be a person with a disability and also to be an athlete with a disability. And I think it's this kind of tricky area because a lot of times, as an athlete, as a Paralympian, I don't feel like I'm always included in the conversations about disability overall. And when we are, the stories tend to focus a lot on overcoming and inspiration and all the incredible things that we are able to achieve as athletes, which is a lazy way to write a story, first of all, but also I think that it somewhat alienates us from the rest of the disability population, because the stories that are being told are this very like inspiration heavy kind of gross nonsense, but also they are experiences that not a lot of the greater disability community can relate to.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And it's like, it's interesting to think about like being an athlete as an identity as well, because we see this in other like identity mixtures where it feels like to be a part of one identity, people feel that they have to kind of like let go of their disabled identity. And there's just this lack of nuance of like, you can be both.
For sure. And I think it's tricky because as an athlete, right, you want to be strong, you want to be powerful, you want to be fast, you want to focus on those parts of who you are, and what you are attempting to achieve, this very competitive, very high performing piece of your personality. But that doesn't take away from, that's just one piece of who I am, of who we all are as athletes. And as you know, identities are multifaceted, and being a disabled athlete, that's a huge part of who I am, as is just being a disabled person. And the challenges that I face in my day-to-day life are no different than anyone else with a disability. I think that part just gets minimized in order to kind of amplify this very competitive, very high performing, excellence driven piece of competitive athletics.
Yeah, that's so interesting and is already kind of like changing my biases and my thought, because I kind of expected that you were going to say that like you feel some like left out of the athletics community, but it's interesting that the barrier feels like from the disabled community actually, and I'm sure there's nuance to that, but that's very interesting. And I know later in this interview we're going to get more into inspiration, overcoming all of those things. But just to give some background to our listeners, let's talk about your like athletic trajectory, because you went to college to play basketball. You started playing sports when you were 11 or 12. And then, so when did you make the switch to marathon running, which ultimately led you to the Paralympics and medals and things like that?
So I started playing wheelchair basketball and also doing wheelchair track and field when I was 11. The city of Philadelphia, I'm originally from outside of Philadelphia. And the city of Philadelphia Parks and Rec Department had just started this like new kids adaptive sports program. And so they reached out to people in the area through other organizations, through hospitals, to try to recruit kids to become a part of that program. And so I started doing both really early on and loved them both from the start. As I was getting older through high school, continued playing both sports. And I really, really wanted to go to the Paralympics in track and field as a wheelchair racer. It turns out I was just doing the wrong events, which we'll get into in a second. So I ended up being recruited to the University of Illinois to play wheelchair basketball. Started there in 2004 and played all the way through 2009. But I was also there as a dual sport athlete. So my focus was basketball and I was there on a basketball scholarship. But as like cross training, I was still a part of the track and field team. And so around 2006, not around 2006, in 2006, in fact, in May of 2006, my coach and one of his friends bribed me to do a marathon in Colorado. Which I found out later, they fabricated this whole story about going to this camp and that I wasn't really eligible, but they would let me go. And in return, I had to do this marathon. Anyway, I found out later it was all a bunch of baloney, like 10 years later. But did the marathon, finished second or third. And part of the deal with the agreement was that I had to turn over my prize money to like pay for my registration for this camp. Anyway, all of it was a lie. But regardless, I did that. And as a college sophomore, giving away a check for $1,000 was probably the most painful thing I experienced.
Yeah.
So 3 weeks later, I got talked into doing another marathon. And the selling point for me was that I could keep the prize money if I won any. And that was it. I ended up winning the race. Really, really close to the course record. I took like 15 minutes off my time, and I was like, oh, I guess I'm a marathoner now.
That's awesome.
So it's a ridiculous story.
It's a great story.
Fast forward to 2008, and I was invited to tryouts for wheelchair basketball as well as trials for track and field, and ended up making the switch to really focus on wheelchair racing then, and went to the Beijing Paralympics as a wheelchair racer, as part of the track and field team, and then kind of went on from there.
That's awesome. When you were in school, like on doing as a dual athlete, were you like immersed within the athletics department, or did you feel like kind of the wheelchair athletics were separate?
So something that's really interesting about the University of Illinois is the way that the adaptive athletics program is set up, because it's set up within DRES, which is the Department of Recreation and Education Services now. They change the acronym every once in a while.
Yeah.
So it's set up within that department, and that's a division of the College of Applied Health Sciences. And because the adaptive athletics program works out of that like division, we actually fall under the College of AHS, not within the DIA and not within the athletics program. So our funding is separate, and everything is separate from the DIA and from the non-disabled athletes competing at University of Illinois.
Interesting. DRES Center. I love that place. Listeners, I also went to the University of Illinois, and they have a pretty great like disability resource system in general. That's where I got my ADHD diagnosis and had just really great support. So good school to go to.
So as an athlete, especially at Paralympian, I'm sure you get like a lot of, oh, how inspirational you are and all that. Can you tell me, how does that make you feel, and how do you navigate that in your daily life?
So I think that the inspiration issue is a complicated one, especially when you are talking about athletes and talking about people who are doing something that is extraordinary and could be considered inspirational. And even if you look at non-disabled athletics, if you look at the Olympics, a big part of the story is who the people are, where they came from, what sorts of challenges they faced and obstacles they overcame in order to be able to achieve this incredible thing and be the greatest gymnast in the world. And so I feel like I kind of zigzag around this issue a lot as an athlete with a disability, because yes, there are things that I have done and achievements that I have that are exceptional, that I worked really, really hard for, that yes, you can be inspired by someone having 7 Paralympic medals. You can be inspired by someone setting world records and winning marathons and all of those things. But I think it's difficult because non-disabled athletes have the luxury of existing outside of that story. They are more than a tale of inspiration. That's just a piece of who they are. It is a piece of their identity. For athletes with disabilities, that becomes the whole story a lot of times. And because that inspiration porn, stories of overcoming disability and overcoming these challenges, we're so like oversaturated with them in the media. That's what people expect. And that's, I feel like, what gets pulled out of the story. So we talk about this a lot at the USOPC and how to tell those stories in a way that we're focusing on athletic achievements as inspiration and not existing and not daily life. And those things in themselves shouldn't be inspirational. They're doing nothing at all to normalize disability. And yes, it is difficult as a person with a disability to exist in a world that is not made for you. But by exceptionalizing that and making it this amazing, inspirational story that I buy my own groceries, you're doing nothing to, one, help the world become more accessible and more open and understanding to disabilities, to increase that level of education. You're just carrying on with all the same stereotypes and doing nothing to push the narrative forward.
Even when talking about this podcast with people, they'll tell Aaron and I, like, oh, that's so amazing. Like, you're so inspiring doing that. And the second that inspiring word gets used, it's like, okay, like, do you actually think what we did is cool? Or are you like, wow, these two disabled girls, good for them? So I'm curious then, it seems like you've experienced that as well, the like taking away your own joy because you're worried that the praise is coming from a place of underestimation. So how do you celebrate yourself and celebrate your accomplishments in the face of that kind of like daily ableism?
So rewinding a tiny bit here, just for like day-to-day activities being considered super inspirational, I think the hard part there is that is exposing the internalized ableism, right? That is someone like, oh my goodness, this is so amazing. It's so amazing that you're going and buying your own groceries. It's because in their mind, what they have been taught, what they believe is that you shouldn't be able to do that. Their expectations for individuals with disabilities are so low that they think it is incredible that we are capable of deciding what we want to eat for dinner. And that's the part that I think is really difficult. For myself, I think that it is just like a piece of me that I have always wanted to push boundaries and break barriers and see what I could do. And so part of that is that I think that nothing is ever enough. None of these, I always want to do more. I always want to push things further. And I think as a result of people being very inspired by me as a kid, because I would go out and play with my friends, those very basic day-to-day things. I was like, oh, you think that's inspiring? Wait until I show you what's really inspiring. So I feel like I've always had this little piece of me that's like, you think I can't do this? Well, let me show you.
That is very relatable. I feel like I am also an overachiever.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I have to be. Because I feel it's like, if I don't, say, go to college, people will think I didn't go to college because of my disability. And that's just not the case. I did go to college, but like, you know what I mean? Like not everything I do, but a lot of what I do is to just say, see, I did it. Now what? And I think that can be inspiring, I think, to other disabled people. I think that's important too, to consider that we should be inspiring to other people who have a disability. And I think that's very powerful.
I think it's hugely important. And it took me a really long time to see myself as someone who had the potential to be a role model or the potential to inspire kids. But when I look back to where I was, became a wheelchair user at 5, started playing sports at 11, but that was the first time I really had a community of other people with disabilities. And I think back to how powerful it was for me for the first time to meet an adult with a disability that was active, that had a family, that had a job, that was doing all these things. And not as an 11-year-old, that was something that I had really ever thought about, like, can I do this? Can I be this person? But kind of like subconsciously just being there and being immersed in that world. And the same thing, being a part of the adaptive sports program at the University of Illinois, which is full of incredibly high achieving individuals in sports and otherwise, was just this like, yeah, of course I can. Why would I not be able to do that? And that was so important to me. And it changed myself and my confidence and the way that like I saw the world and felt about myself so much as a kid that I was like, I want to be that person for somebody else.
I love that. And Aaron, I love what you said there. Just everything that was just said, because I think that is what a great way to combat what we were just kind of talking about, that feeling of like, well, what if I am inspiring, but I don't want it to be taken like I've never thought of it through the lens of like, for my community. Like I'm cool to be inspiring for my community and a role model for like, but it's that kind of othering of like non-disabled people looking at you and being like, oh, that's so inspiring. But that is a great kind of reframe of like, I'm not going to get upset at being called inspiring for this, because I'm going to remember that like there's a part of the sentence that's being left out that's like inspiring to other kids like me. And that I think is really, really important. And, you know, even just doing this podcast, like Erin's 40, I'm 27, and I feel like I get to learn so much like just about life. And that's like, I'd never thought about that like, oh, I can be inspiring for a specific group instead of just inspiring getting groceries.
So there's this trope about overcoming disability. So what to you is the difference between overcoming disability and accepting your own disabled identity?
I would like the overcoming narrative to go away entirely, because I think all it does is reinforce this idea that as members of the disability community, as disabled people, you cannot be both disabled and successful. And that in order to find success, in order to meet these challenges, in order to grow, you have to overcome your disability. And it cracks me up, to be honest, whenever there's stories specifically about Paralympians who overcome their disability to become Paralympic champions, because spoiler alert here is that you can't be a Paralympian without a disability. So like, actually. But I think that it's all about disability, like everything else, exists within a spectrum. And it's all about maximizing your potential of the abilities that you do have, learning how to work within your own limitations. And that's not overcoming your disability. That is accepting and learning your disability, learning about your disability, and letting it become a piece of who you are and your identity and your personality. And then also being successful. Like, I didn't overcome my disability to learn how to drive. I learned how to drive with hand controls. I didn't overcome my disability to do a marathon. I did it in a wheelchair. I hate this even more than the inspiration narrative, because I want these stories to focus on like, yes, I am disabled, and yes, I did this thing, and yes, you can do both, and you can be both.
Totally. And like, it's more about overcoming ableism.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
1000% about overcoming ableism and the preconceived notions that the non-disabled community has, but also your own internalized ableism, which is the thing that I think is not addressed nearly enough. And I think that it's a tricky thing, as we were talking about earlier with disabled athletes and Paralympians, that part really gets minimized. And I think sometimes in order to fit in to the athletic community, some of that gets internalized a little bit more within disabled athletes.
Oh, interesting. That makes total sense. I appreciate what you said about the like, I didn't overcome driving. I did it with these adaptive controls. I did these kind of things. And I think that is important. You know, this episode, when it comes out, is going to come out in July, which is Disability Pride Month. And I think that this is an important conversation in Pride, because if you're overcoming instead of accepting, there's a chance that you're going to not give yourself the accommodations you need to be like at peace, have joy, comfortable. Like when you get rid of the overcoming narrative, then there is so much space to be comfortable. And I think that sometimes we jump from like having a difficult time with identity to being really proud of your identity, but there is an in-between course there. And that course includes accommodating yourself and building a life that is enjoyable instead of just like brute force trying to prove that you can do something even though people think you can't.
For sure. I think that's so important. And it's something that I think back to myself as a kid, when it was all about proving that I didn't need accommodations and proving that I didn't need mobility devices and proving I didn't need things because I could do it without it. And I think that there is a balance between being resilient and being adaptable, and something that people with disabilities know really well because we are forced to do it all the time, but also giving yourself and allowing yourself to have the things that you need to make your life better.
I love that. And yeah, like it is worth it to do things to make your life better. Like that's a hard thing
100%.
to learn, like especially as women in general, women with disabilities, like there is this level of just like put your head down, accept it, and prove people wrong. But it's just so worth it to do what you need to do to enjoy your life.
Yeah. And the more you do it and the more exposure you get and the more people see it, I think the more that does to change the overall perceptions of disability and what it means to be disabled, and also makes people think twice about what their own preconceived notions are about what disability looks like and the things that they do. Like you never see anyone at the store with a disability, so why does it matter if you block the curb cut?
Mm-hmm.
My least favorite thing in the entire world.
Yeah. Oh, cars that park like on the sidewalk and
Yeah.
completely, this is the worst. And yeah, it's that self-fulfilling prophecy of like, well, I don't see disabled people here, so the accessibility doesn't matter.
Doesn't
it's
matter.
Like,
well, you're
then
really
you'll
not going to
never
see disabled people there if you're blocking their only entrance. So,
literally. So that lack of understanding and just like deep underestimation that many non-disabled people have, I think directly leads to like invasive and prying questions about things that are, especially I'm sure as an athlete, like you're like, why are you asking me about this? Like ask me about the race I just ran. Like
this is something else that we have been, as we as an organization, as the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, have been doing like media training, not for athletes, but for media outlets. That's a really, really big thing that we've been focusing on leading up to the Paris Paralympic Games is, so why are you asking this person their origin story? Does that have anything to do with the story you're trying to tell? Is it important to know how or why they are disabled? And if it is, because sometimes it is, that's fine. But stop and ask yourself, if you need to tell everyone 3 paragraphs on how this person became disabled, when really the point of the story is that they just won a gold medal in something.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something, we have focused on when like creating this podcast, was kind of having that space where, for some, it is freeing to have a space where you can say like, this is my story, this is my diagnosis, this is where it is. But a lot of the time we go through an entire episode without ever saying any of our diagnoses, because it's like, especially with, we have guests that have done really cool things, you included. It's like, if you need to know, Google. Like,
yeah,
go
that's
ahead.
The other thing, you can find anything else, anything you want to know about me through Google. You can find out what my birthday is. You can find out what my diagnosis is. You can find out how many sisters I have.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be the meat of every single interview. No.
Yeah, when I graduated college, a newspaper went to the graduation and interviewed me. And I was like, why? And they asked me the first question, how did you overcome your disability? And how hard was it? How hard was it to get your degree? I'm like, it wasn't hard. Bye.
Goodbye. Also, still using a wheelchair, did not overcome my disability. Yeah, sorry exactly. To break the news to you. Yeah. I have not been healed.
So I know that you're a broadcaster yourself. Can you tell me, how did you get into that? And how do you navigate asking other disabled people questions and being respectful of them?
Falling into broadcasting was the happiest accident of my life. So I retired from competitive athletics after the Tokyo Paralympic Games. I had a obligation with a sponsor, and so I actually retired sometime in 2022. And have a really long-standing relationship with the Chicago Marathon and with all of the major marathons within the United States, because I was a professional marathoner for a decade. I did all the races multiple times. And the elite athlete coordinator for the Chicago Marathon called me up and was like, hey, you're not racing this year, but we've really been trying to get better television coverage of the wheelchair division specifically. The local news stations have committed to putting a camera on the wheelchair division. We want to broadcast more, but the problem is none of our analysts really know anything about wheelchair racing. And so it just ends up being this really awkward, like, oh, there they go. They're going really fast. And it's just kind of this like super weird, uncomfortable situation. And so she was like, how do you feel about it? Like, we'll bring you in, we'll set you up, we'll go through all the pre-planning with you. Do you think this is something you can do? And one of the best and worst parts of my personality is that I am like exceptionally overconfident in myself and everything that I can do. So of course I was like, oh yeah, definitely, no problem. I can do that. I've never been on live TV before talking about a race as an expert analyst, but I can probably do that. And it actually turned out to go really well, super comfortable. And each one I do gets a little bit better. So I covered the Chicago Marathon, got a lot of positive attention from it. And then it just kind of started to gain momentum. And I got asked to do more and more. And I'm going to be an analyst for the Paris Paralympic Games covering track and field this summer, which I'm really excited about.
Congrats.
Also, I just
That's
realized I didn't
exciting.
answer any of your question, Erin. But the fun thing about what I do is that it doesn't end up being a lot of interviewing. And it's more just live in the moment sports analyzing. And so I get to minimize the disability part of the story and just talk about this is what they're doing. This is the technique. These are the tactics. This is this person's strengths and weaknesses as an athlete. And when I get asked questions about like, oh, tell me about this person's disability or whatever, I can just change the subject and not answer that because that's not why we're here. It's not what we're talking about, unless a big part of the story is this person's new to wheelchair racing because they were just injured and blah, 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 blah. But otherwise, I can just kind of flip that narrative and we can move away from talking about their origin story and more about where they are now and why what we're watching is interesting.
You know, it's funny that you say you didn't answer the question the first time because I think you did, in that like the answer there is like because you're disabled yourself. Like there's like that's the understanding, and I think it's a good reminder to like employers and people who are hiring or finding people in general that like no matter how much experience someone has in like a certain field, if we're covering disability culture, if you're doing medicine for disabled people, whatever you're doing, a disabled person themselves is going to be better to tell that story, to give that advice, to do practice that medicine than anyone else. And I even think about like, you know, Erin and I didn't have much podcasting experience, but we understand the identity that we're talking about. And that's why Easter Seals trusted us to be a podcast host. And I think that that's so smart because when things come from within the community, then you know you get to control that narrative, just like you said. So I think that is a important story to share, that like yeah, you stumbled into it, but you're phenomenal at it, and people like watching you because you know what you're talking about because it's your lived experience.
Yeah, that representation is so important, and I feel like it's a place where the disability community falls behind other underrepresented communities. And a lot of times it is doctors and people in the medical community and not actually disabled people themselves talking about their lives and their experiences. It's other people talking for us. And that's something that I really, really think is important to change and is important to get more representation from people in all aspects of the disability community, to be more visible and to be talking about their own experiences, not doctors and people talking about the medical model of what this disability looks like.
Yes, exactly. Or parents
or
yeah.
siblings, or that guy who had one kid who used a wheelchair in his class in 4th grade.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
No, you go.
I was gonna change topics, so if you have something else to add. Okay, cool. But yeah, I just think that that's like so crucial, and we're moving towards a world of better representation, but you're so right that like there's no other marginalized identity group necessarily that's like, okay, we're going to interview parents and providers for these people to get their story. And I do think that again, that comes from that underestimation of thinking that like, yeah, like all these disabled people, they're not going to be able to tell their own story. And yeah, I just think that I would never think when you hear the phrase representation matters, I wouldn't necessarily think to myself like sports broadcasting, but like, oh yeah, in every facet of life, actually representation matters.
Big
Like,
time. And the number of messages I've gotten from high school and college kids that have disabilities and are like, oh, I really want to go into sports broadcasting, or I really want to do this. And I have never seen someone who looks like me in that field. And this is huge. That's awesome.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
incredible.
That brings it back to that whole inspiring our community.
Yeah, that's the part of
Okay.
inspiration that's okay. I will accept being inspiring in that way.
Absolutely.
I want to get into one topic that I'm interested in, and so it's kind of a shift, but I think it's an important conversation to have on this podcast. So when you go on your website and are reading your kind of story, which again, you can Google her. So we're not going to go through it all on here, but there is a portion that really piqued my interest in when talking about, after your diagnosis as a child dealing with all of this, the way that you began to kind of cope was by restricting eating and not eating. And I think it's really cool that you're open to talking about that and sharing that experience. My family has been deeply touched by eating disorders, and I think that so often, especially when women deal with anything eating disorder related, vanity is what is brought up. Like, oh, they want to be thin, ideal women. When in reality, in my experience, it's usually actually looking for control.
It was.
So what? Yeah, I want to
sorry.
hear about I just want to hear about your experience with that and what you think about that.
This, like a lot of other things, was something that I didn't talk about for a long time, and it was something that I was really ashamed of, partially because I thought that it made me look weak, and because, as we talked about before, as women and as members of the disabled community, we don't want to talk about those pieces of who we are. But I thought that it really helped tell my story in, one, how important it was for me to find a community of other disabled people that I could relate to, but also help anyone else that is going through that transition, because it's hard. And a lot of people say really, really hard to become disabled as an adult, because you have a whole life and you have this whole identity that you have built, but it's also hard as a kid. And I, as a 5-year-old who was diagnosed with a rare neuroimmune disorder, who went from being able-bodied to paralyzed overnight with no like real known reason, I felt like everything was out of my control. I woke up today and I can't walk. Am I going to wake up tomorrow and I won't be able to use my arms, or I won't be able to speak, or I won't be able to see, or maybe I'm going to wake up and everything's going to be normal again. And I felt like I had completely lost any control that I had as a 5-year-old. And the one thing that I still had the ability to control was whether or not I was going to put something in my mouth and swallow it. And that was really, really difficult for my parents, I'm sure. I was hospitalized multiple times, had a feeding tube. Through our pediatrician, they found a pediatric eating disorder specialist. And I remember a breaking point for me was him talking to my parents while I was there about all of the interventions they had done, and trying to force nutrition into me through a feeding tube. And he looked at them and said, well, if she wants to die, let her die. And that was the moment that I was like, well, I don't want that. And shortly afterwards, I found sports and I found a community. And that really helped me deal with all of that loss of control that I felt, because like I said, it was the first time that I had met other people who were my age and active with disabilities, but also older people who were active with disabilities. And that's when I was like, this is okay. there's things that I can still do and I'm going to be all right.
Thank you so much for sharing that and just being willing to be vulnerable and talk about that, because I really do think that so often eating disorders are met with such medical intervention, and obviously medical intervention is important, but I do think it is so easy to write off an eating disorder as like, this is this problem based on vanity or how they want to look or things like that, and to not get to that deep root. And I really do think that a lack of control in many aspects is that, because eating disorder rates are incredibly high in the neurodiverse community. And I think often about like my experience as an autistic child, and walking through life kind of feeling like it seems like everyone has this rule book of how to be human, and my brain wasn't born with that. So it makes sense that, that does feel like a lack of control. So it makes complete sense that exactly what you said, I can control whether or not I'm going to swallow this bite of food. Like I can control that. And, this seamlessly transitions us into part 3 of this interview, where we talk about the Easter Seals pillars, where Easter Seals is working towards equity and inclusion when it comes to education, employment, healthcare, transportation, and a big one, community. I think it is so interesting and poignant that it wasn't some specific medication or therapy that was what was able to help you, but a community of people who understood you and who could show you a future. So I'd love to hear more about like what you think that power of community is, and how we just like continue to create communities for young disabled people, but just young people in general who feel that lack of control.
It is absolutely everything. And it was everything for me. And it's the reason why I'm still involved in all of these like junior level, developmental level adaptive sports programs, because finding that community and meeting other people was so, so, so huge. And it's not to say that I didn't have friends at school without disabilities, because I did, but there was always a piece of who I was, a piece of my identity that they could never relate to, no matter how hard they tried. And it was just kind of this like, I had these two worlds and these two groups of friends, but by having one, it helped me kind of blend my life into the other, and learn how to relate across those lines, which I think was really, really important. And I know that sports are not for everyone, but I really strongly encourage any parents who have a child with a disability to at least try and look at an adaptive sports program. If it's not something they stick with, if it's not something they're super interested in, but it's a big part of, for non-disabled kids, every kid plays soccer. That's just a part of like, as a kid growing up, you're going to get involved in sports at a young age, because you learn so many things about yourself. You learn independent skills, you learn teamwork, you learn how to like healthily control your competitive urges, how to cooperate with others, all of those things. And I think that disabled kids miss out on that a lot. And that's something you can find from these sports programs. And maybe it's not that, and maybe it's music or board games or debate or something else, but there aren't a lot of spaces in this world that are exclusive to individuals with disabilities, and adaptive sports is one of them.
Yeah, that whole time you were answering that, I was thinking about you saying that, like, well, to play wheelchair basketball, you need to be in a wheelchair. And that is that, like, that's very important. And maybe, if you're a parent listening or something and you're like, well, my child would hate sports, like, because I get it. I was a kid that didn't like sports. But it's that, yeah, that exclusivity. Like, maybe it's a theater group for people with disabilities, but it is specific. It's that, or an Easter Seals program or camp that has
absolutely
like a lot of kids with disabilities. Like I think about that film Crip Camp that Judy Heumann talks about, like the just the power of being in a room of a bunch of people who look like you, when you have been, or look different than you, but have similar differences or things like that. Like that ability to look around and be like, I'm not alone and I'm going to be okay and we can have joy together is really important. And that exclusivity, which I do think, we need more groups like that are a bit exclusive and this podcast is quite exclusive. Like, we're not going to have guests on that aren't disabled because it takes away from the point of that, like, this is a space where we get to be in community with one another and we don't have to over explain ourselves.
And it's a place where you don't have to be self-conscious, and you don't have to mask, and you don't have to try to minimize your symptoms, and you don't have to force yourself to fit in. It was incredibly freeing.
I love that. And yeah, so important for kids to find community.
I want to jump to a different topic, because Easter Seals does a lot for, or starting to do a lot for airline accessibility. And I'm sure you know the horror stories of people, especially those who use wheelchairs and traveling on a plane. Can you share your experience with that? Have you encountered, damaged chairs or anything like that?
So I travel a lot. And I always tell, anytime I go to board a plane or I check in at the airport, the gate agent is like, "Oh, you know exactly what you're doing." And I'm like, "I travel a lot." And they're like, "Oh yeah." And I'm like, no, like a lot, like 50 to 100 flights a year, a lot. So I have, and this is one of those things that is like the sad truth and reality. I have made changes to my equipment specifically to minimize the chances of damage. And what I have found is, on my everyday chair, the fewer number of moving parts I can possibly have, the better. For a very long time, I had no wheel locks at all because that's something added on that can be broken off. I've been really lucky that I haven't had a ton of serious damage. Only a handful of times have I had any damage to my personal devices, but it's always shocking anytime someone non-disabled travels with me for the first time, because I warn them that it is probably the most dehumanizing experience you can have as a person with a disability. Airlines and airport staff are so worried about the liability side of things that they very much forget that they are dealing with human beings. And not only are they dealing with human beings, but they're dealing with people who, this is their lived experience. This is their day-to-day. When I tell you, I don't need you to lift me in and out of my chair and then I can do it myself, and I tell you that I don't need you to push me up the ramp, I'm not doing that because I'm being difficult or trying to prove that I am independent to you. I'm telling you because I do this all the time. This is my life, and I know the best way to do it because it is my body and my equipment. And the number of times that I have to argue with people is, this is a terrible thing, and I probably shouldn't even be telling you, but I'm going to tell you right now anyway. So I got so upset with people trying to push me up the jet bridge. I've started just falling over when they come up behind me and shove me, because I don't have a lot of back support on the back of my chair. And so normally when someone comes up behind me, they shove my backpack or they shove me between the shoulder blades, which if you are not expecting is enough to really throw you off balance. And so instead of fighting against it and just telling them no, I've started just falling forward and dropping my bag. And then they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "This is why I told you not to do that. This is why I asked you to please not push me. Not because I wanted to struggle up this ramp and to prove to you that I could do it myself, but because it is more dangerous and it is more difficult if you try to help."
I love that. That's very smart.
But it's frustrating that it gets to that point, right? That
Absolutely.
I'm so frustrated, and I just know that no one is going to listen to me. That's how I've decided that is the best way to combat this.
Yeah, and being an organization that does advocacy for things like this, it is easy to get caught up in the numbers, because that's what makes people listen. They're 31 wheelchairs a day damaged, this many complaints filed, blah blah blah. But that realization of the dehumanizing effect of it. I don't think like lawmakers understand that, or people who are working on airline policy. I don't think they understand that like it's a full on dehumanizing experience. And even you saying that like I've been very lucky that I've only had minimal damage a few times done to my chair. Imagine if you were like, I've been very lucky. My legs have only been bruised badly. They've never been cut off. Like that would be wild. Like,
it's a totally different scale that we're working on here.
It's so wild. And I think that just goes to show like it's amazing that you have an incredible career and have been able to like get to the point you are where you are traveling so much. And there are a lot of careers that need travel. So accessible air travel is crucial to an accessible workforce. And it's just very important. So I appreciate you talking about that.
And there's so many small changes that could be made that would make this better, especially just training airport staff, aisle chair operators, any of the assistance contractors. Just like listen to people, ask them what they need. If they ask you not to touch them or not to lift them, don't do it. If they tell you what the best way to help them is, just listen. I never get upset ever in my daily life with someone asking me if I need help. If it's grabbing something in the grocery store, if it's getting my chair in or out of my car, if it's at an airport. But if I say no, for the love of God, please listen to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just like basic consent. Like don't, and yeah, even I think like having your back pushed by someone else unexpected, like that's like basic bodily autonomy. Don't touch me if I say I don't need help. Like, yeah, that's
it's back
wild.
to everything we've talked about, right? Though that the non-disabled community knows better.
Yeah,
and they know what we as disabled individuals need.
Yeah,
better than we know ourselves.
Yeah, that's always the thought process, and I think I've said it before, but like if there's one like thesis statement out of this podcast, it's that we are the experts on our own experiences.
1000%.
Yeah.
And our own bodies and our own needs.
Yes. And our own choices and what our happiness looks like. Like other people don't get to define those things for us.
Completely.
Yeah, I think it's just wild that literally we could interview anyone who in the air travel is just such a, exactly what we said, dehumanizing experience. And I hate that. Okay, we're almost out of time. And Erin and I could talk to you for hours. This is so fun.
This has been great.
This is awesome. Before we wrap up, I want to ask this question because I know you like talking about this and I want to see your excitement. So one thing that we talk about at Easter Seals is the importance of teaching disability history. We have some affiliates who have done entirely teach disability history campaigns. They're really incredible. And it was through prepping for this interview and looking at like the work you've done and things and other interviews you've done that I actually learned as an alumni of the University of Illinois. But it was through this, getting ready for this interview, that I learned the U of I's role in bringing disabled people into athletics and onto college campuses. So I'm wondering, how has your work as an archivist and when you were getting your degree in information and library sciences, how has your work like helped you better understand the history of adaptive athletics and like the history that led to where you are right now?
You're right. I am so excited to talk about this. This is my favorite thing ever. So my second semester of graduate school, actually, I was in Rio for the Paralympic Games. And as a result, I took a really, really limited class schedule. One of the things I did was work as a research assistant for former director of DRES at the University of Illinois, who was working on writing a complete history of adaptive sports at the University of Illinois, as well as just like the history of all of that and the history of people with disabilities in higher education. And so I got to do a ton of research in the University of Illinois archives. I also at the same time took a special collections class where I got to go into like the special collections library at the University of Illinois. And that was the first time I was ever like looking at super precious, rare museum artifacts. And they were like, oh, you can touch them. So I decided I was going to become a disability sports history expert and also an archivist so I could touch the cool stuff within like it changed the entire trajectory of my career. But I think it is so hugely important when we think back to the history of individuals with disabilities. And it wasn't until 1948, the first class of disabled veterans came into the University of Illinois. And at the time, nothing like that had ever been done. It was 22 soldiers who had been paralyzed in World War II who wanted to use their GI Bill. And at the time, a grad student, Tim Nugent, who became Dr. Tim Nugent later on, developed this program where all of these students could come in. They were at the University of Illinois Galesburg campus, which was the perfect place to start this program because it was a decommissioned hospital. So it was one of the few public places that was actually accessible to individuals in wheelchairs, with accessible bedrooms, bathrooms, everything that you would need. And in addition to being students and taking classes, they also had required courses on activities of daily living and transitioning to life as someone with a disability, whether it was learning how to drive, learning how to hire personal care assistants, and then on top of that, required recreation programs. And the whole thing was built off of this model that rehabilitation would be more effective through recreational programs where you actually learned skills that you would need. You would learn more about moving a wheelchair and controlling your body by playing wheelchair basketball than you would by going into a physical therapy office and doing the same repetitive motions over and over. And that just continued to grow. And so the University of Illinois has this incredible, amazing history of being not only like groundbreaking in accepting individuals with disabilities into the university, but also the first organized collegiate sports programs in the 1940s. This program was also super instrumental in developing all of the architectural standards that the ADA is based on. And they did that in the 1960s with this group of students. So outside of like the original DRES, which was this like temporary tar paper building that was built for this influx of students coming in from World War II, they had what they called the ramp to nowhere. And it was just this super long giant ramp that they could adjust the angle of. And that's how they came up with the 1 inch for every 1 foot, was by having individuals, different levels of disabilities in wheelchairs, push up the ramp and see what was hard and what was doable. So there's this just like incredibly huge, expansive, broad history of the U of I beyond athletics, just with disability rights and inclusion on top of that. And it's wild because I had lived my entire life pretty much in Champaign, Illinois until I moved to Colorado. I was there for 16 years. And the disability community is so well integrated into everything the University of Illinois does. And then on top of that, the town, because it's a college town. So it was never a question whether something was going to be accessible, whether I would be able to get in or out or use the bathroom, because that's just a part of the culture of the town. And I moved to Colorado, and that was the first time that I like made reservations somewhere. And I was like, oh, this is up 6 stairs. I can't get in here.
I'm so glad you pointed that out. So, listeners, I'm from Champaign-Urbana, and it is so ingrained that it's not even really spoken about. Like, I didn't really necessarily realize it until I moved to Chicago and was like, why are there steps into every restaurant? Like, that's not a thing everywhere else. But then I learned that it is a thing, and it's actually Urbana-Champaign that's different.
Yeah, it's Urbana-Champaign. The university, for all of their campus buildings, essentially accepted what is now like the ADA's architectural standards in the 1960s, 30 years before the ADA even existed, which is just wild to think about.
That is so wild.
It's such a cool place.
That is.
I should go there.
Yeah, come visit me, Erin. I'll show you around.
Totally.
Show you all my places. That's so cool, and also just like a reminder of that there's this huge chunk of history not being taught in everyday education. Like disability history is important and shows us like disability history is a section of history that really shows us how one person or one group of people can make major change by just being willing to try. Like, let's just try something else. Let's just be innovative.
And I think the
really
whole
important.
community exists as an example of proof that it can be done.
Absolutely.
It's not too hard. It's not too expensive. It's not catering to a minority of the population. It can be done, and it's really incredible when it happens.
Right, and it didn't take away from anything else about the U of I. You know, it's still a leading education place. There's incredible engineering feats going on. There's a supercomputer. Like, there was no amount of, resources only went to this. No, it was just understanding that when you
there's
allow
also
everyone
amazing
in.
historic buildings and incredible
Yes.
architecture and all of these things that haven't been ruined or destroyed by making them accessible to individuals in wheelchairs.
What an important point, that it wasn't destroyed, because that is something that people will use all the time. Like, oh, we can't make this accessible because it'll ruin it. Wow, I love that. I'm so glad you shared that. I love that this is like your passion, and I'm just so grateful you came on our podcast and shared it with us. And also is such a great like proof of what we began this episode talking about, of like, yeah, we could talk about your disabled identity or being an athlete and just miss out on this whole section of your story, which is so cool. Like,
this is the funner stuff.
Yeah, like, you got such rare books and now you can like archive things. Like, it's very cool, and I think is a great literal example of like, don't just get stuck on one thing, get to know people because they have cool stories. Like, this is awesome. And you know, I'm, like I said, I'm from there and I didn't even know this stuff. So thank you for coming on, sharing everything you've shared with us today. This is really wonderful. This episode is going to come out during July. So happy Disability Pride Month. I'm feeling so much pride in my identity right now. There's nothing quite like just getting to like spend an hour going back and forth and being like, yeah, that will
It's really affirming.
It's so affirming. And it's like, yeah, wait, we do understand each other. And you know, the big point there is that community is, I think, probably one of the most important ingredients to baking that pride pie. So thank you for coming and being in community with us for the last hour, Amanda. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you both so much for having me. This has really been a ton of fun.
Totally. And to our listeners, I hope you had a good time listening, and we'll see you next time on another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you to our listeners, and as always, thank you to Easter Seals for giving us the space and resources to share such authentic conversations from within the disability community to our listeners.
And we'll see you next time for another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong.
Everything you know about disability is wrong.
This is a podcast brought to you by Easter Seals.
You know, we actually work for Easter Seals, but maybe our listeners don't know what we do.
That's true. Easter Seals is leading the way to full access, equity, and inclusion for disabled people and their families.
And did you know we've been doing this for more than a century?
This includes helping disabled people find meaningful employment and addressing healthcare needs for all ages.
We're proud to serve communities across the country and ready for the next 100 years. For more, check out easterseals.com.